Okay, no promises for anything to be regular, because I keep saying that things are going to be on Sunday, but then it's like I get behind and get occupied with other stuff. Plus, I am actually going to be moving, so yeah, there will definitely be videos in the week, hopefully on Sunday, but when I say Sunday, I mean Sunday on YouTube, because I do know that the reading streams are actually more popular there than they are on Twitch. That's fine. Twitch is totally more gaming than anything. But anyway, onto the clue of the broken locket. So, we get the mystery of Cecily. That's the best way that we can describe it. It's like Nancy Drew and the crew go to Maryland to open up this cabin that Nancy's dad. Like, he was contacted by the caretaker, and when the caretaker was like, I am not staying! I'm going to send you the key! Which he did. And I'm like, darn you! What's his name again, by the way? What was his name? Hold on, let me look back. Henry Winch. He's like, I am not staying. And so he sends the gosh darn key, so now Nancy has to make sure that she gets there on time, because Cecily was supposed to arrive like the next day. Thankfully, Nancy, because she is blessed with good fortune here, does actually make it on time with Bess and George in tow. But some weird things are already happening. So that's basically it. I don't know how else to summarize it other than that. It looks like Cecily has a twin. Because they've seen Cecily and some other young woman, and it's like, oh my goodness, there is a twin. So there's the whole mystery of that, and then there's something about a ghost launch kind of deal. For those who don't know, a launch is called a boat. It's another way of saying boat. Specific type of boat, but I think made more for rivers and lakes kind of thing. But yeah, so there's all of that. So anyway, let's get into this. Chapter 6, The Phantom Ship. All the girls stared excitedly at the sign. It said Puddingstone Lodge, Private. Oh, by the way, Cecily is actually like trying to figure out her family heritage. Apparently there's supposed to be some kind of family treasure. And she's been looking for it because she is trying to get married, but her beau, her fiance, the love of her life, for we don't know how long. In Nancy Drew world, forever, but in real life, who knows? He is setting up a lawsuit, or I think he's already in the process of a lawsuit against his company, this production company, that may not actually be distributing money fairly. So there's that, so there's all that. But that's actually all people should understand. That's actually what Nancy Drew's about. It's not just about her solving mysteries. It's her helping those who are misfortunate when it comes to finances. So basically they're poor. And in this case, you have a young woman who is trying to get married, and they don't necessarily have the money for a wedding. As well as it could affect their ability to travel together. So that's what the Nancy Drew books are actually more about. It's like Nancy loves the mystery, but she loves helping out people who are in dire circumstances. But anyway, back to the story. Puddingstone, Nancy exclaimed. Perhaps it's called that after the lake's original name. which would mean that it dates back many years. Oh, let's talk to the owner, Cecily urged. The girls peered ahead eagerly as Nancy drove on. In a few moments, they came to a large open garage in which 2 trucks were parked. On the side of each was painted Driscoll Brothers Plant Maintenance. About an eighth of a mile farther on, they came to the Bluff House. It was built of stones of various shapes and sizes. That must be why it's called Pudding Stone Lodge, George said. It's certainly odd looking, Bess pointed to the roof. It was irregular in design, with sloping sides broken by peaks and turrets. I wish you guys could see the illustration. Like, the Nancy Drew books actually have illustrations in them. So, yeah. The illustration's actually pretty good. But anyway, moving on. So sloping sides broken by peaks and turrets. Cecily was excited and wanted to rush up to the door at once. Nancy held her back, reminding her that she had been injured on the grounds of the lodge only the evening before. Well, yeah, that's what happened too. Cecily, went out to kind of, explore by herself, and Nancy found her, knocked unconscious with this, was it goose egg? I think that's what they call it, on her head. Basically, a large bump. So clearly something hit her in the head, and then Nancy nearly got crushed. Well, she and Cecily nearly got crushed by this log that was stable, but clearly someone pushed it, and it came rolling down, and Nancy was able to, save both her and Cecily. But, yeah, that's what happened. I'll go. Nancy got out of the car and went up to the front door. Her ring was answered by a short, burly man with heavy black hair. The illustration makes him look taller. Mr. Driscoll, Nancy asked pleasantly, do you own this house? No, I rent it. What's that to you? It's so attractive. We girls thought we would like to look around the grounds a little. Do you mind? Yes, I do, the man said in a surly tone. Get out of here and don't return. Nancy was taken aback. She did not argue and turned away, deciding that they had better not tarry. What was the reason for the man's belligerence? Very odd, she mused. To act like that. Could he possibly be responsible for Cecily's injury or know about it? As she drove off, Nancy explained to the girls what the man had said and her suspicions. Cecily looked worried. Oh dear, how am I ever going to hunt there for the Iron Bird if we're not to be allowed on the property? It might even be in the house. George grinned. Nancy will think of a way, I promise you that. Oh yes, she will. If anyone knows secret of the old clock, yes, she will. The others laughed and then became quiet until they reached town. Here the girls separated. George offered to go and order bottled gas from the fuel company. Cecily went to telephone Nico. Nancy and Bess headed toward the general store to shop for supplies. The proprietor, Mr. Joplin, was an inquisitive person. You're newcomers around here, he said. Yes, we are, Nancy answered. She introduced herself and Bess. Noticing 2 other men in the store, she felt it wiser not to give any more details. Bess, however, was not so cautious. Darn it, Bess. This is also why you have duct tape when you have a Bess on your team. It's because she's gonna let something slip. So, yeah, always have a Bess on your team, but always also have duct tape. Just in case that Bess decides to not be just shh. She blurted out that the 4 girls were staying in the Baker cottage and that it certainly was a scary place. At this remark, one of the 2 men, tall and pale with hard eyes, stared intently at the girls. And if he has hard eyes in a Nancy Drew book, that means he's a bad guy. The shopkeeper chuckled. You mean you're scared by the loons? Yes, Anne. Nancy squeezed Beth's arm so she would say no more. Nancy was about to begin her shopping when the heavy-set customer came over to the girls. Are you Carson Drew's daughter, Nancy? He asked. When Nancy nodded, he added, Sure pleased to meet such a famous young detective. I'm Henry Winch. I mailed the cottage key to your father, so I suppose he sent you here with it. That's right. Just then the young sleuth noticed the tall, thin man gazing at her with narrowed eyes. He turned abruptly and left the shop. Who is that man? Nancy asked. Both the proprietor and Henry Winch said they did not know. It was the first time he had been in the store. The girls asked Mr. Winch about the Phantom launch. He proved to be talkative and vividly described the ghostly craft. The old boat drifts along in the mist, Winch went on, and then when it reaches a spot where it's supposed to have gone down, it vanishes. The caretaker shuddered. Started a couple of weeks ago. Some of our folks began leaving earlier than usual. If they're scared to come back next season, I'll lose business. I'm thinking of selling out and going back to my brothers. To stay. Nancy and Bess, although sympathetic, did not comment. They quickly purchased the items they needed and said goodbye and left. They met George and Cecily at the car. George announced the bottled gas would be delivered soon. Also, she had stopped at Mrs. Hoskins to inquire about Puddingstone Lodge. She learned that it belonged to the Kenneth Wayne family of Baltimore, who had rented the house early in the summer to two brothers named Driscoll. "Oh, I must telephone the Waynes right away," said Cecily. She told the others she had not been able to get hold of Nico either at his hotel or the theater where he was playing. "I did leave word I was at the cottage with friends," she said and sighed. "Oh, I just hope he isn't too upset." "He better not be too upset. I mean, his girlfriend's in the cottage by herself with strangers." Well, she said friends, but it's like, does she really know Nancy and the crew? No, she does not. So calling them friends is way too soon. But this is Nancy Drew world, so they're all friends here. Cecily hurried off to telephone the Waynes, and Nancy went to call her father. She learned that he would be away on a business trip for a couple of weeks and wished her luck in the mysteries. "But don't take unnecessary chances," Mr. Drew cautioned. Who here thinks that Nancy is going to make some unnecessary choices? Well, they're all necessary, but she's gonna take some risks. Moving on. "I'll do my best not to," Nancy replied. "Goodbye, Dad, and lots of luck to you, too." Cecily reported that she had been unable to get an answer to her phone call. The girls climbed into Nancy's convertible and headed back to the cottage. As they reached the end of the lane, a man suddenly stepped into the road directly in their path. He was the tall, thin man from the general store. He held up his hand and ordered, "Stop!" Nancy had no choice but to obey. To the girls' surprise, the thin man smiled at them and came up to the car. "Don't be worried," he said. "I'm Carl Driscoll. I heard my brother Vince ordered you off our property, and I came to apologize. There's no reason why you girls shouldn't look around the grounds. You're welcome any time." He smirked and went on, "I have a hunch, not just sightseers. You looking for something?" Nancy would have preferred that the girls say nothing, but Cecily spoke up eagerly. "Gosh darn it, Cecily! You don't just reveal your life story to a stranger!" But anyway, before I forget, Lady Fritzler and Juan Diego Ahern, thank you for the follow. I need to, pay more attention to the people who follow me. I believe that Lady Fritzler is not a bot. I don't know if Juan Diego Ahern is, but if Juan Diego Ahern is not, thank you. Thank you for the follow. But anyway, moving on. But yeah, Cecily, no! You don't reveal your life story! This ain't a Disney movie. But anyway. "Yes, I'm looking for an iron bird. I have no idea what it looks like, and I'm not sure whether the lodges is the place for me to search. My ancestors once lived in a similar house, though, and I'm curious to find out if this is the one." Carl Driscoll showed great interest. "An iron bird, eh? Sounds unusual," he said. "I wish I could help you, but I haven't seen any such bird around since we rented the place. I'll keep a lookout, though." Which really means that he's going to try to find it himself and keep it to himself. He said he must be leaving and walked off toward Puddingstone Lodge. Nancy had a sudden hunch that he would search for the iron bird himself, that he probably suspected there was more to the whole story than Cecily had revealed. "Thank you, Nancy." "What do you make of all that?" George asked with suspicion in her tone. "One brother is surly, and the other goes out of his way to apologize." "It is strange," Nancy admitted. "I think we should take advantage of Carl Driscoll's offer and inspect the grounds very soon." Cecily was eager to do so, and it was decided that they would go directly after luncheon. Back at the cottage, the girls were delighted to find that bottled gas had been delivered. Oh boy, hot water, Bess exclaimed. Me for a relaxing bath. Not now, George said. Sleuthing comes first. Sleuthing? Or taking a shower and then sleuthing? I mean, you want to be clean for a mystery, but then you already be dirty after this mystery, so you would be wasting more water. So I guess George is right. The girls had a quick lunch and directly afterward put on hiking clothes and shoes and started up the lake path to Puddingstone Lodge. From boundary markers, they discovered that the property was very large. Their search went on all afternoon, both in the vicinity of the stone house itself and over the grounds. There was no sign of an iron bird. Finally, Bess suggested they give up. I'm so tired it could break into pieces, she said. Let's go back to the cottage. Though disappointed, the others agreed. They luxuriated in hot baths, rested for a little while, and then had supper. Afterwards, Cecily proposed that they go to town. I'd like to try telephoning Nico and the Waynes again. At 7 o'clock, they set off for the village. All the stores were closed with the exception of Eddie's soda shop. Ooh, I would like a soda shop. As Cecily went into a phone booth, the other girls engaged Eddie in conversation. They learned he was a newcomer in town, but was doing very well. People around here must like ice cream, Bess remarked. Ooh, Alibi and Ashes flashback. For those who don't know, Alibi and Ashes is one of the Nancy Drew games. And in it, you can give people, well, you can only, if I say people, it's only Ned, Bess, George, and Nancy. You can give them ice cream, and there's all kinds of crazy flavors. I would actually, just for that portion alone, it's good for kids. The rest of the game is kind of boring. I'm not gonna lie, the rest of the game is boring. But definitely, like overcharging hundreds of dollars for ice cream, it's worth it. Anyway. They sure do. In fact, people come from miles away to get my ice cream. It's good as homemade. In that case, I can't resist a double helping, Bess said with a giggle. What kind? Vanilla, Bess replied with a twinkle, with hot fudge sauce. Coming right up, said Eddie. Nancy and George said they would take the same. As they were being served, Cecily came from the booth and sat down at the table. Eddie stared at her. I'm glad you came in, he said. The record you ordered here is here, he grinned. You owe me $1. Cecily in turn stared at him in amazement. I've never been in your shop before, she said. This is the second time I've been mistaken for another girl. I'd certainly like to meet her. Eddie looked bewildered. Well, if you say so, it must be true. He shook his head. But you two girls sure look alike. Where does the girl live? Nancy asked. Eddie shrugged. She didn't say, just told me she'd be back. Say, the record's nifty. Nico Van Dyke's latest. His listeners were astounded. Cecily cried out, Nico's record? Why, She did not finish the sentence. The girls did not explain to Eddie, but Nancy asked if he would mind playing the record. And if you have another, I'll buy it. I have plenty now. They sell like hotcakes. I can't keep them on hand long. He went into a back room. Cecily was blinking furiously on the verge of tears. She explained to the girls that she had failed again to reach the Waynes or Nico. I'm so worried, she said. He may be really angry. I wish I could see him. Nancy said soothingly, I am sure you will soon. Eddie came back with a record and played it for them. The girls listened intently to the Flying Dutchman's number and at the end voted it an excellent piece. It's Nico's best, said Eddie. He must be making a pile of money. A pained expression came over Cecily's face, and George quickly suggested she have some ice cream. Thanks, but I'm not hungry, said the red-haired girl. When the others had finished eating, Nancy picked up the record and they left. George, who was ahead of the others, stopped to look in a shop next door. It was called the Gift Emporium. She called her friend's attention to the display window. In it, hanging as a wall plaque, was an ornamental iron bird. This gives me an idea, said George. Let's ask if there's an ironmonger around here. He might still have some information in old files of an iron bird having been made long ago for Puddingstone Lodge. Cecily brightened at once. That's a great idea, George, she said. We can start inquiring tomorrow. After this, Cecily acted more like her animated self, and conversation was lively and cheerful on the way home. As they were about to unlock the door to the cottage, Bess, who was facing the lake, gave a scream. Listen! Look! The others turned in her direction. They could hear a ship's bell ringing. Up at the misty end of the lake, the girls were startled to see an old-time excursion launch, brightly lighted. It moved slowly, as if against a buffeting wind. Passengers dressed in clothes of the early 1900s walked about freely. They were talking and laughing. The Phantom Ship, Cecily said in a hushed voice. The girls' hearts began to beat faster. Could they believe their eyes? Was the story true? But where did the ghost ship come from? Bess stuttered nervously. I hope it doesn't come down here. Suddenly from the phantom craft came a scream of terror. The launch began to list. The next second, all the lights went out and the boat vanished. Dun, dun, dun! Chapter 7. The Bullseye Window. Bess shrieked as the phantom launch disappeared underwater. I never believed in ghosts, she said shakily, but now I'm afraid I do. George looked at her scornfully. Ghosts nothing. There must be some logical explanation. What is this, Scooby-Doo? Although, hold on. Did Scooby-Doo come after... I need to look this up now. Real quick. Did Scooby-Doo come after Nancy Drew? I'm pretty sure it did. I'm pretty sure that Scooby-Doo came out in the 1950s while Nancy Drew was out in the 1930s. Must look. When did Scooby-Doo become a thing? When did Scooby-Doo first internet? Can you act like that you want me to type? Okay, when did Scooby-Doo first air? It says 1969. So not even 1950s. It was late 1960s, early 1970s. Okay, so yeah. Yeah. Nancy Drew predates a lot of things. Nancy Drew predates Superman. Yes, people. She predates Superman. She predates Batman, definitely. I mean, she's older than any one of the Justice League. And Marvel. So, yeah. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Cecily had little to say except that she was mighty glad that the girls were with her. I would have been terrified staying here alone, she added. I don't blame Henry Winch a bit for wanting to move. Nancy suggested they go to bed early. I don't believe the ghost ship will bother us, she said reassuringly. I mean, it is a ship. Unless you can get it on land, it shouldn't actually, be able to do anything to you. See, if you're going to be afraid of a ghost, be afraid of a ghost that actually can, pop out of your closet. Not one that happens to be on a lake and just stays on the lake, you know? I'm just saying. It's different when you can actually, close the door, you don't have to see it, versus it's in your house! But anyway, moving on. The young sleuth did not say anything to the others, but determined to get up early and investigate the far end of the lake to see if she could pick up any clues to the weird apparition. She awoke at daylight, dressed quickly, and slipped out of the cottage. What is with people not telling people where they're going? Buddy system! But anyway, Nancy followed the path along the water and crossed the beach below the lodge. Then she set off through the woods. As she reached the area of fog, Nancy saw a swampy stretch before her. It won't hurt me to slosh through, she said to herself gamely. Holding her shoe, she waded in. Why, the water's warm. Her theory that there were probably hot springs in that section of the lake had proved to be correct. The swamp was about 300 feet long. It was more treacherous than Nancy had bargained for, and she found herself floundering and slipping until she was soaking wet. The girl detective smiled. This is a crazy procedure, she told herself. I haven't picked up one single clue, and what a mess I am. And that is what you get, Nancy Drew. You don't just walk into a swamp. You come prepared with, well, I'm actually not sure what kind of gear you go into a swamp with, but you definitely would want, like long boots, you know? And you may actually want, like, you definitely don't want your best clothing on either. So, not to assume that Nancy's wearing her best, but, you know, if it's something that you generally like to wear, you don't want to go out into the swamp with that either. You always go prepared. But seriously, back to my thing about buddy system. Nancy was there when she saw Cecily's unconscious body. You would think by now she would understand. Don't go in anywhere, especially in a place that she's not familiar with, by herself. If somebody is knocking people out and throwing logs at people, you don't go by yourself. Jeez. Safety first, people. Safety always first. Anyway, nevertheless, Nancy pushed on and after a while reached dry land. The trees were thick here, but just beyond them was a large, relatively cleared area with scrubby bushes and tall grass as well as a few saplings. In the center of the clearing stood the tumble-down remains of an old-fashioned bandstand. Nancy examined the platform and the storage area underneath, but found nothing to suggest an answer to the phantom ship. Disappointed, she turned back and reached the cottage just as the other girls were getting up. They stared at her. Nancy grinned. Yes, I know, I'm a sight. But it was all in the cows of trying to solve the mystery of that phantom ship. However, I learned absolutely nothing. She added laughingly, It must arise out of the water after all. The others knew she was teasing and were sorry she had found no explanation. Cecily remarked, I'll never feel completely safe here until that mystery's cleared up. Nancy, do you have some theory about it? The girl detective shrugged. I've been wondering about those people at Puddingstone Lodge. This ghost ship business started after they moved there. You mean they could be connected in some way with the mirage or whatever it is? Asked George. Nancy looked thoughtful. It's a possibility. Anyhow, I'd like to do some investigating in the area of the lodge. Please don't mind if I skip helping with the dishes. No, you're going to do those dishes, Nancy. I'm teasing. I don't blame her for not doing the dishes. Run! Flee! Solve the mystery, Nancy! Get away from the dishes! Do you think you'll be safe alone? Cecily asked fearfully. Guess what Nancy's going to say. Just guess what Nancy's going to say. She's going to say yes. She's going to say that she is totally fine, and she's going to go out. Gosh darn it, Nancy. Nancy assured her she would be, and said she might be able to hide among the trees better if she were alone. She changed into dry clothes, and directly after eating set off. Hold on, what clothes though? Because if you have a bright yellow shirt and you're standing out in a bunch of green, you're just going to stand out regardless, Nancy Drew. She's not dumb, but it's like, she's like, I can blend in with the trees better if I'm alone. And it's like, are you sure though? Are you sure though? Like, what if you packed nothing green with you? And when I say green, not a bright like neon, I'm like talking like dark colored green or black even, like something that can actually blend in, camouflage. But knowing Nancy, she probably has it packed. I don't know. There are times that Nancy like alternates between. I can't speak. She alternates between being prepared and not being prepared. It's so weird. It's so odd. This time, Nancy chose a vantage point on the side of the house which faced the lake. Her attention was drawn to a third-floor window called a bullseye window because of its roundness and small size. Suddenly, Nancy tensed. Sharp flashes of light were coming from the window where the bullseye window was. Apparently, a mirror was being used to reflect sunlight. Nancy watched intently to see if anyone would appear at the window, but no one did. Maybe the pane is too high from the floor, she thought. The young sleuth could well believe that something strange was going on inside the big stone house, and even that someone was signaling for help. Her mind conjured up all sorts of possibilities about a prisoner who was bound and gagged in the room. I certainly can make a deep, dark mystery out of almost anything, she chided herself, with a smile as she moved away. Little did she know. Little did she know. I actually don't know. It has been a while, so I'm not spoiling anything. So it could actually be easily like the villains do up to something, or it could be someone actually gagged right there. Like, who knows? It's like, always listen to your instincts, Nancy Drew. Nancy realized she had been gone from the cottage for some time, and no doubt the other girls were eagerly awaiting her return, so they might all go to town to start their investigating. When Nancy arrived at the cottage, she heard Nico's hit record being played and realized Cecily must be using the cottage owner's phonograph. Sounds better than it did last night, Nancy thought, walking in. She mentioned this to the others. Cecily said it was her very own record, which Nico had given her. Nancy, curious, went for her disc and put it on the player. It was good, but definitely not so clear-cut as the other. It does sound different, Cecily conceded. Not so sharp. Sometimes it seems a bit fuzzy. Nancy picked up the two records and compared them. Although at first glance they looked exactly the same, she noticed that the label on hers was paler than the other. These records have the same serial number, said Nancy, but it's just possible the one I bought last night is a pirated recording. You mean, said Bess, her eyes opening wide in astonishment, that someone is forging Nico's records and selling them? It's possible, Nancy answered. I think we should ask Eddie where he bought the supply of records. Also, I think you, Cecily, should telephone Nico's record company and tell them. Nancy said she had still another suggestion. Let's drive on to the county seat of Ridgeton. One of us can go to the courthouse and trace the ownership of Puddingstone Lodge as far back as possible. The other girls were ready, so as soon as Nancy showered and dressed for town, they set off. As they were driving past Henry Winch's dock, they saw the stocky man coming out of the rear of his store with a suitcase and an armful of clothes. He's leaving, George exclaimed. Nancy stopped and asked him if this were true, and he said yes, indeed. He's not going to stay in that haunted spot another night. She urged him not to be hasty, saying she was sure the girls would get to the bottom of the launch mystery soon. I sure wish you could, he answered. I tell you, would save this lake as a summer resort. Nancy smiled. After all, Mr. Winch, she said, no harm has come to you. Why not wait a few days? We're not far away if you need help. Well, I'll think about it, he said. Maybe I won't go right now. I'd like to rent a canoe from you, Nancy went on. I may want to inspect that phantom ship at close range. A wild look came into Mr. Winch's eyes. Don't, Miss Drew. It ain't safe. I'll leave a canoe at your cottage, but you better think twice, young lady, before you go up into that foggy area. And actually, he is correct. Fog tends to hide objects in the water. So like rocks and stuff. Depending on how thick the fog is. If it's very, very thick, then it actually makes it very dangerous to actually get in a canoe and go all around. So, yeah, don't go exploring in a gosh darn fog. Like, it's one thing if you're walking around with a walking stick. It's another when you actually, like, are on a boat. That's actually another reason you would have these riverboats and showboats and stuff sink, is because of fog. They couldn't actually see anything, and they crashed. All it takes is a good thump, and the next thing you know, you got this crack and water's pouring in, and the ship is sinking. Woo! So yeah, don't. If you don't have to, don't go on a boat. Don't go on a canoe in a fog. But the worst thing is a storm. Like, the absolute worst thing is being on water during a storm. Everything else pales in comparison than being on a boat during a storm. Especially if it's a hurricane. Anyway, where was I? All right, I will, Nancy promised. That's a lie. Nancy Drew, you're lying to me. When they reached the main road, Nancy stopped the car. The country seat is to our left and Misty Lake to our right. Why don't we go to Richmond first and see about an ironmonger, then stop at Eddie's on the way back?" This was agreed upon, and Nancy turned left. As they rode along, she told about the flashing light from the bullseye window of Puddingstone Lodge. George said, "I believe it was just the sunlight glinting on the glass." Cecily and Bess were inclined to think there was more to it, but could offer no explanation which Nancy had not already thought of. When they reached the county courthouse, George offered to do the research work and try to find the identity of the original owner of Puddingstone Lodge. "Good," said Nancy. "Bess and I will inquire about an ironmonger while Cecily phones the record company." The girls separated. Nancy made several inquiries and learned that a Mr. Finneran was the present owner of an ironmongering establishment, which had been in town for over 100 years. Well, that is fortunate. The business was housed in a small building on a very narrow cobblestone street. Mr. Finneran said that unfortunately his old ledger had been destroyed by fire, and he personally had no knowledge of the sale of any ironbird to Puddingstone Lodge. "But why don't you look around at some samples of our old-time work?" he suggested. "Maybe it will help you." The company had set aside one room of old and new products. The antique birds included cranes for the garden and owls and eagles for roof cornices and door knockers. "This is probably the type of thing we should look for," Bess whispered to Nancy, and her friend nodded. The girls thanked Mr. Finneran and walked back to a tea room where the four girls had arranged to meet for luncheon. After they gave their orders, each told what she had found out. Cecily had still been unable to reach either Nico or the Waynes. "Nico, what the heck are you doing, man?" She had had a talk with an official of the record company, however, and he had asked that someone bring the two records to their office in Baltimore. But yeah, sorry for that snapping at but it's like, seriously, Cecily has been trying to call Nico, and he has not been answering the phone at all. "Nico, your girlfriend's calling you. Where are you?" "They're very much interested in your theory of piracy, Nancy," she said. "I think you should be the one to go." "I'll be glad to, but let's decide tomorrow." George said she had learned the original owner of Puddingstone Lodge was Andre Delaroy and had been built in 1825. His two sons were Simon and William. She smiled at Cecily. "It sure looks as if Puddingstone Lodge was really your ancestors' home." Cecily was greatly excited and listened intently as George went on. "The property was inherited by Simon Delaroy's only child, Anne. She married a Wayne." "Oh, George, that's wonderful," Cecily said, her eyes dancing. "We are looking in the right place for the ironbird. Just think, the old family treasure must be buried someplace at the lodge. As soon as we finish eating, let's go back and make plans." So the Waynes are actually her relatives. "But first we must stop at Eddie's soda shop," Nancy reminded her, "and find out the name of the jobber who supplied him with Nico's records." When they reached the shop, Nancy suggested that they purchase some candy and nuts so that Eddie would not be suspicious. As he was filling the order, she asked casually, "By the way, Eddie, who supplies you with records?" The soda shop owner grinned. "I suppose you mean Nico's hit. I can get you all you want. They come from a local jobber. His name is Neil Raskin." "I don't need any more right now, but when I go home—" Nancy left this sentence unfinished. Quickly she consulted the telephone directory and found that Raskin's office was located near town on the highway. As the girls walked toward the car, Nancy said, "Cecily, why don't we drop you and George at Neil Raskin's office while Bess and I search again for the iron bird?" "You'll come back to pick us up?" "Yes." I don't know why that's a question. I mean, you want to get that out there, but, it's like, how else are you going to get back? Like, Nancy has to come back to pick you guys up, unless she wants you to walk. Nancy Drew's not cruel, though. Cecily said she was torn between two desires, to hunt for the bird and to help Nico. She finally agreed to go with George and find out more about the record. Nancy Bess drove off. "We'll leave the car at the cottage," said Nancy. When they reached it, the girls were surprised to see a note tacked to the door. It said, "Come to lodge. Bird is found. K. Driscoll." Chapter 8. Mean Relatives. "Our search is over," said Bess. "Now we won't have to search for the ironbird after all." Nancy frowned. "I don't trust Carl Driscoll. It would be dreadful if he's already opened the bird and found directions to the fortune. He may try to claim it." "Cecily would be crushed," Bess commented. The girls hurried outside. Nancy now noticed that the canoe had been delivered. Thinking she had better put the paddles in the cottage, she went down to the lakefront. Tied to the paddles was a key and a note requesting that the canoe be returned to Winch's boathouse when the girls were finished with it. The key was to be left with Mrs. Hosking. Nancy felt that the message also meant Henry Winch had decided to go away. If I can only solve this mystery, she thought, I'm sure he'll come back. She put the paddles in the cottage and with Bess started off for Pudding Stone Lodge. They were met at the door by Carl Driscoll and his wife, who smiled upon being introduced to the girls. Both seemed very pleasant and told Nancy they had conducted a search and found an iron bird in the cellar storage room. This may be the one your friend is looking for, said Mr. Driscoll. If so, you're welcome to take it. Follow me. He led the way to the kitchen and opened a door to a darkened flight of steps leading below. There's no electricity down there, so take this flashlight with you. Walk straight ahead and you'll come to the storage room. For an instant, Nancy hesitated. Was this some kind of trick? She still did not like Carl Driscoll, despite his apparent friendliness. She wondered again about the strange humming noise which seemed to have come from the house. Then Nancy told herself, oh, I guess it will be all right. She took the light and Bess followed her down the steep steps. A musty, moldering odor reached them. I wouldn't want to stay down here long, Bess remarked. It's positively spooky. They walked straight ahead and soon came to a room with a sagging open door. One side was lined with shelves, the other full of hooks. On one of these hung a wall plaque of an iron bird. Nancy beamed the flashlight closely on it. Is this the one? Bess asked. I doubt it. This doesn't strike me as very old, Nancy replied. In fact, it looks like the one we saw last night in the window of the gift shop. Nancy stood lost in thought. The suspicion crossed her mind that the Driscolls might have planted this bird, hoping to fool the girls so that they would take it away and not come back to the lodge. Nancy played her light over the storage room. At the far end stood a large old-fashioned walnut chest of drawers. Above it she could just make out the outline of another door. Nancy wondered if this were a closed-off exit to the grounds. Let's go, Bess urged. This place gives me the creeps. At the top of the cellar stairway, Mrs. Driscoll stood waiting for them. Excuse me. When Nancy said the iron bird was definitely not the right one, the woman looked disappointed. I'm so sorry. We hoped we had helped you in your search. Would you mind if we look other places in the house? Nancy asked her. Why, no, Mrs. Driscoll answered. Nancy said she would like to go out on the roof. It is just possible I may find some evidence that an iron bird was once used as a cornice, she explained. Mrs. Driscoll agreed, although a bit reluctantly. Bess spoke up. How about my looking around the outside of the house at the door knockers and so forth? Then I'll walk back to the cottage and start supper. All right, but if I get too interested in my search, you better drive to town and pick up George and Cecily. At least Nancy realizes that she might get too involved in the mystery right now. Bess nodded and went out the front door as Mrs. Driscoll led Nancy up the stairs. They walked a short distance down a hallway past several rooms with closed doors until they reached one which the woman opened. It revealed the attic stairs. At that moment, Nancy heard children's voices. They were coming from one of the bedrooms. Your children? She asked Mrs. Driscoll with a smile. Yes. An instant later, the door burst open and identical twins, a boy and a girl about 3 years old, rushed out. Both were crying. Uncle Vince is mean, the little girl sobbed. Yes, he is, the little boy echoed. We don't want to play with him. Mrs. Driscoll was annoyed. She grabbed the children and shoved them back into the room. Don't you dare leave here again, she said angrily. Taking the key from the inside of the door, she slammed it shut and locked it from the outside, pocketing the key. Well, child abuse! Instant child abuse! At once, the children began to cry and scream loudly while kicking and banging on the door. Nancy was appalled at such treatment and barely refrained from protesting. She wondered about the strange girl in the woods. Was she the Driscoll's nursemaid, and where was she? Mrs. Driscoll marched back along the hall to the attic stairway and told Nancy to go up. As she herself followed, Mrs. Driscoll explained that explained that as a sideline, the brothers had an acrobatic act. Vince was trying to teach the twins to perform and made them practice their stunts over and over again. They're 3! They are 3 years old! Oh my goodness! You know how children are, Mrs. Driscoll said. They'd rather just play. They're 3. I just want to punch this woman. When you don't have to, violence is not the answer. But the urge is in me. Nancy made no comment. She felt that 3 years of age was pretty young for children to be handled in such a manner. Right? In the attic, Nancy looked around for the bullseye window, but did not see it. There were 2 regular-shaped windows, both of them too high up to reach. They cast a dim light around the place, which was filled with an assortment of old trunks and boxes. Turning, Nancy noticed a closed door, which evidently opened into a third-floor bedroom. That must be where the bullseye window was. She asked Mrs. Driscoll about this. Oh, you noticed that from the outside? The woman queried. Yes, that's where the circular window is. The room is locked. The owner keeps something stored in there, I guess. She showed Nancy a small door which opened onto a flat section of the roof with a low railing. I think what you have in mind, Miss Drew, is dangerous, but if you insist upon looking around, you can do so from here. As you can see, part of the roof is flat, but part is pretty steep. I warn you to watch your footing. Nancy promised she would do so and stepped outside. Mrs. Driscoll said she would go downstairs now and attend to the children. From where she stood, Nancy could see the entire lake and all the cottages which faced it. She saw Bess just entering the front door of the cottage. I guess she didn't find anything, thought Nancy. She looked over as much of the roof as she could see, but there was nothing resembling an iron bird. Spotting a ladder against the chimney toward the front of the house, Nancy climbed over the railing and carefully made her way down the sloping roof to the ladder. Quickly she climbed it and, holding on to the chimney for support, was able to view the entire layout of the roof. There was not a sign of a decorative bird in any section. Nancy thought maybe the bird is in a fixed ornament, and Simon Delroy hid it on the property. A worrisome thought struck her. What if someone had already located it? Nancy climbed down the ladder and made her way back to the attic door. To her amazement, it would not open. Dun, dun, dun! Oh dear, Nancy murmured. I hope it's not one of those self-locking doors. She tugged and pushed, but the door would not budge. Had it locked automatically, or had the door been bolted from the inside by one of the Driscolls? And if so, what was the reason? The only explanation she could think of was that these mysterious people wanted to keep her out of the house until they had accomplished something about which they did not want her to know. Nancy looked off into the distance, wondering if she could possibly signal Bess, but at that same moment she saw her friend come from the cottage, Locket, and then hurry up the path to where the car was parked. The faint sound of a motor came to Nancy's ears, and she knew Bess had set off for the village. Nancy tried the door once more with no luck. She began to pound on it loudly. She rapped until her knuckles were sore, but no one came to let her in. Maybe everybody had left the house, she thought, which would be a really bad move. I was about to say the other word, but it was a really bad choice by, was it Driscoll? That was the name? By Mrs. Driscoll? Mrs. Driscoll is a jerk confirmed. Exasperated, Nancy began to cry out, Help! Help! I'm locked out on the roof! She kept repeating her plea, but if anyone heard it, he had no intention of coming to her aid. I wonder if there's any way to get to the ground from here except through that door. Nancy walked through the lake side of the house. She leaned over the railing and thought she saw what might be a fire escape. Here, the roof sloped sharply. A drain pipe led down into the gutter. Nancy decided to lie flat on the roof edge and edge herself along, holding onto the pipe. If she were right about the fire escape, she could reach it from this angle. Her heart thumping, the young sleuth climbed over the railing and tested the drain pipe. It seemed to be firm. Nancy let herself down the roof gingerly, and indeed found that what was once a fire escape. But time and weather had loosened it from the wall. She knew it would be too hazardous to try climbing down. Besides, there was a 10-foot drop from the end of it to the ground. There was nothing to do but go back to the attic door. I guess I'll have to break it down, Nancy thought wryly. When she reached the door, she blinked unbelievingly. It was open a crack. I didn't just dream it was locked, Nancy told herself. Someone was playing a grim joke on me. She hurried down the attic stairs. As she started along the hall, Nancy heard quarreling adult voices coming from one of the rooms near that of the twins. The next instant, the door opened with a bang, and Vince Driscoll stepped out. Seeing Nancy, the burly man seized the girl's arm roughly. His face was red with rage, and fire seemed to leap from his eyes. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Chapter 9. The Vandal. Indignant, Nancy shook herself loose from Vince Driscoll's grasp. At that moment, his sister-in-law came from the same room and glared at him. "Carl and I gave Miss Drew and her friends permission to come here to hunt for an iron bird," she said coldly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Vince asked sullenly. "I'd have warned you not to. She's snoopy and a troublemaker." He turned to Nancy. "Don't show up here again." Mrs. Driscoll set her jaw firmly. "That's for Carl to decide, not you." Vince seemed about to retort, but instead kept still and stalked on down the hall. Nancy then told Mrs. Driscoll about having been locked out. The woman said, "Vince didn't know you were here and went up to the attic. That door to the roof is not supposed to be open, so he locked it. After a while, I went up to see why you'd been there so long and found out what had happened. Since you were on the balcony, I assumed you were somewhere on the roof and unlocked the door." "I appreciate that," said Nancy. "I could just picture myself staying out there all night." She decided to make light of the matter and pretend that she accepted the explanation without question, but she was very suspicious. Suddenly she thought of the closed-up room with a bull's-eye window. Had the Driscolls locked her out deliberately because they themselves had been keeping something, or someone, hidden in it? And maybe moved out the person or object while it was outside, Nancy concluded. It could even have been the red-haired girl. What's the reason? Mrs. Driscoll escorted Nancy to the front door and said goodbye pleasantly. "It's too bad the bird in the storage room isn't the one you're looking for," she said. "If we happen to come across another, we'll let you know." "Thank you," Nancy said, and started down the road. The Driscoll family puzzled her. She wondered about the brothers' maintenance business. They seem to be home a lot, Nancy thought. Well, maybe they don't get many calls. In any case, they certainly did not seem to get along well together. Could it be because of the twins? Nancy reflected. But why? She vividly recalled the hard look Carl Driscoll had given her in the general store. She was sure he was not pleased that the girls were living at the lake. Though why did he go out of his way to be helpful? Well, if he seems helpful, then you would never be suspicious of him, right? When Nancy reached the cottage, the three girls came out to meet her, and she reported her adventure. Bess was concerned. "Why, Nancy, you might have slipped off that roof and been killed." Nancy grinned. "I guess I'm just a tough old sleuth," she answered. "After everything you've been through, that is actually a very true statement." "It's a good thing, because you're in for a surprise," George stated. "Wait until you see this cottage." As Nancy walked inside, she stared aghast at the scene before her. Tables and chairs had been broken. Every drawer in the place had been emptied of its contents, which were scattered around the floor. Bess had endeavored to put some of the things away before picking up the other two girls. The three had just started working again when Nancy arrived. "It's vandalism," Cecily said to Nancy. "Oh, who would want to do such a thing?" "So far," said Bess, "we haven't found anything missing." George nodded. "Some intruders are like that. They get so angry if they can't find what they're looking for, they'll tear a place to pieces." The girls went on straightening up and repairing the furniture as best they could. As they worked, George and Cecily reported that they had gone to Neil Raskin's office, but he was not there. No one seemed to know where he had gone, or when he would return. Suddenly Bess said, "I'm starved. Do you realize it's 7 o'clock? I never did start supper. What with this mess?" The girls stopped working, and by 7:30 were seated around the little table, eating hungrily and chatting over the day's adventures. "They all seem to add up to nothing," said Cecily, a sad expression in her eyes. To cheer her, Nancy suggested taking a ride in the canoe. Cecily eagerly accepted. "You two go," said George. "Bess and I will do the dishes." Nancy and Cecily each took a paddle, and without even consulting each other, they found themselves heading for Puddingstone Lodge. By this time, it was late dusk, and a mist had begun to rise from the water. In the foggy area, it was thicker than ever. "You'd better stay away from there," said Cecily. "We might get lost." Puddingstone Lodge was well lighted, and Nancy wondered what was going on inside the house. Suddenly, the strange humming noise came to the girls' ears. As before, its source was elusive, seeming to be outdoors and yet muffled enough to be inside. "It might be some sort of generator in the house," said Nancy, "but I shouldn't think we noticed it from here." The two girls listened intently, but still could not figure out the exact location of the sound. Cecily showed signs of apprehension. "We're pretty close to the place where that phantom boat appears," she told Nancy. "Just in case there's something dangerous about it, don't you think we should leave?" Personally, Nancy would have liked to stay, but out of consideration for Cecily, she agreed. They turned the canoe around and began to paddle back toward the cottage. Nancy kept looking over her shoulder, hoping the apparition would appear. Cecily, on the other hand, was wishing just as hard that it would not. The lake remained dark. When they reached the cottage dock, When they reached the cottage dock, Nancy glanced up. She glimpsed a man's shadowy figure moving off among the trees around the cabin. Ooh, this is a scary moment. The Prowler, Nancy thought. She leaped from the canoe and made a wild dash after the man, but he began running too. I'm sorry, Nancy. What are you gonna do? You're not a George. You're not a George. See, George, I can see her tackling the man because she's well trained and she's very athletic. Nancy is moderate. She can do decent athleticism, but she's no George. There was enough light from the cottage and the rising moon to help Nancy keep track of the fleeing man. But he had too much of a head start, and soon she lost sight of him completely. He's certainly actively guilty, Nancy told herself. Cecily had beached the canoe and was carrying the paddles to the cottage. Nancy met her. What in the world made you dash off? Cecily asked. When Nancy explained, Cecily's eyelids flickered worriedly. She was silent as the two girls went inside. Nancy told Bess and George of her fruitless chase. Cecily kept clasping and unclasping her hands nervously. Nancy was about to try reassuring her when suddenly Satin aroused from a half-sleeping posture, arched his back, and stared into the next room, which was dark. What does he see? Bess whispered. Without warning, the cat shot into the room. There was a slight squeak, and in a few seconds, Satin emerged triumphantly, a mouse in his mouth. He placed it at Bess's feet. Oh, how horrible! Bess cried out. Take that thing away! Satin, as if he understood, carried the mouse back into the dark room. Unexpectedly, Cecily smiled. He's having himself a feast, I suppose. George said, I wish Satin had pounced on that vandal and sunk his teeth into the fellow. The girls laughed, then Cecily collapsed into her unhappy mood. A few minutes later, she rose. I just can't stand not seeing or talking to Nico any longer. If you'll drive me to town, I'll catch the late bus for Baltimore and maybe see the last part of his performance. She consulted her watch and discovered that it would be nip and tuck as to whether she could make the bus in time. Nancy agreed to try, and Cecily tossed a few things into... As Cecily tossed a few things into her suitcase, Bess and George declared that Nancy should not go alone. Your father wouldn't like it one bit, said George. We're going with you, Bess insisted, vandal or no vandal. Nancy hugged the cousins. I'm sure it isn't necessary, but I love you both for it. Cecily just managed to make the bus, and everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Next, Nancy drove to the local police headquarters and went inside. Chief Stovall, a friendly husky man, was on duty. She introduced herself and gave a quick report on the cottage entry. The chief listened attentively. We have a very limited force here, Miss Drew, he said, but we'll do our best to nab the prowler. Offhand, I can't think of anyone I suspect among our villagers. Nancy's thoughts flashed to the Driscolls, but she had no proof of her suspicions about them, and said nothing. She mentioned having seen the Phantom launch. Chief Stovall grinned. I've heard those reports, and I certainly don't disbelieve you, Miss Drew. I've been out to the lake several evenings for that purpose, but until I see it for myself, there's nothing I can do. I understand, Nancy smiled, and said good night. She, Bess, and George returned to the cottage, wondering in what kind of condition they would find it. Fortunately, no one had broken in, and the three friends settled down to read and write letters. Satin, too, had curled up at a fire, which was now burning brightly. But suddenly he stood up and stared at the outside door. George grinned. Bess, maybe he's going to get you another mouse. But her grin faded as the silence outside was broken. The girls heard the porch step creak. Dun, dun, dun! Who could it be? Well, I'm going to end on that cliffhanger. Yeah, I was talking so much. I gotta stop talking so much. But, anyway, I was talking so much that we are actually behind. So next time I'm going to try to not talk so much. So that way we can catch up to chapter 15. Because we got a lot to go through. Yeah. But yeah, we are on chapter 10. So we have 11 more chapters to go, and then this book is done, and we move on to book number 12, which is... I have no idea, actually. I don't have the titles memorized. I see book number 13. I do not see the book number 12. That's 14. Huh. I'm just waiting for the mystery of the, what was it? The Ivory Charm? Mystery of the Ivory, yeah, that's what it's called. Mystery of the Ivory Charm, because that one's going to be come with a warning note about how, talk about a book that is culturally insensitive and just focuses on stereotypes. Because it does. It really does. Yeah. Yeah, it is book number 12. We will know. Actually, hold on. You know what? I can look in the back. They always indicate what the next book is in the back. So book number 12 is The Message in the Hollow Oak. Ooh, I like that one. Oh, Mystery of the Ivory Charm is number 13. Woo! Ooh, no. Oh no. Although Message in the Hollow Oak, I would say probably plays on some stereotypes too, because that one's dealing with, was it, I think, Native Americans? Not directly, I don't think, but it's, like, involving the past, and it's a treasure hunt. Clue the Tapping Heels, which is book number 16, I like that one too. Yeah. But I only have books 1 through 24, so from Secret of the Old Clock to Clue in the Old Album. Honestly, I would say, and I want to repeat this in later videos, but I say when it comes to reading Nancy Drew books, stop around 30-something, because after that it kind of gets repetitive and it's not as good as the earlier ones. Like, the earlier ones are not perfect. I'm still when I get back to reading Mystery at Lilac Inn, for example, that one, I'm like, what is going on? You'll know, but I will put a warning sign, because if there is like a very violent thing going on in that book, like almost somebody dying, violent thing, but otherwise, yeah. The one I do want to get to is The Sign of the Twisted Candles. That one's actually it's a really good one. It's actually really one of the best, in my opinion. But yeah, like 30-something, maybe not even 30-something. I definitely don't want 33. I don't like 33. Witch Tree Symbol, that's the one that takes that you have the Amish introduced, and they're stereotyped completely in that one. Like, there's a lot of stereotypes. The one I do like, even though it's like later, is the Crooked Banister. That one is great, in my opinion. I love that one. But yeah, so I'm going to be reading up to Clue in the Old Album. And then actually, I gotta figure out what to read after that. I mean, that's still like a lot of sessions left. I have 2 more sessions reading for this one, and this is book 11. So 2 plus 12, and that's about 12 books left. It's 48. This is 49, 50. So I actually have 50 more sessions with the Nancy Drew books. And then after that, I gotta figure out what else I want to read. Because I don't just want to read for kids. I do want to read like more adult, more adult books like Dracula. Yes, that one is a completely adult book. If anyone says that is not an adult book, it is completely 100% an adult book. But I also want to read, yeah, I do want to read adult books. I'll just say it like that. And those are not for you kiddos. Absolutely not. But there are some other kids books that I do have to read. Like, I definitely want to get into the Brian Jacques Redwall series, which is a really good series. I truly love it more than Harry Potter. I don't care for Harry Potter. Redwall, I believe, is absolutely beautiful. But yeah, actually, I truly could be more differentiated in kids' books, because it's like, I remember being a kid. I know what kids' books I liked. The only books I don't have, though, is the Boxcar Children. Sad. Boxcar Children's awesome. But I also have some young adult books and all that stuff as well. So it's like, I definitely have quite a bit of books. You know, I will also need to figure out how to get Tamara Pierce's series, because she also, well, hers is like more teen than anything, but like that's another good like young teen series to read. So I'm just like looking at all the kids' books that I have. Ooh, one book I definitely want to read that's really good for young kids: The Search for Delicious. You have not experienced anything if you have not read The Search for Delicious. It is stupidly funny. Not stupidly funny, haha, like it's humorous. It's just how everything starts and ends. You're like sitting there, like, really? Really? Basic synopsis. People are arguing over what is the most delicious thing there is. What is the most delicious thing? So that is The Search for Delicious. It's the weirdest argument. The fighting over what is the most delicious thing in the world. This is the most delicious thing. Yeah. So yeah. But I do want to make sure that there's enough stuff for enough recordings for kids, though, and their families. Because, like I said, this is actually like supposed to be for everyone, but I don't want people to be talking inappropriate on here. Because I want everyone to have a good time, and to make sure everyone has a good time, that means you actually have to police people. Be like, no, you're going to behave. So that's why there's no comments. You're not allowed to comment on here. Yeah, so that's actually like the future plans for everything. It's like I am aware of a lot of kids' books that I read as a kid. That I would not be surprised that kids are missing today. Another book I have that I think kids would definitely enjoy, and I definitely would like to talk about it because it is a very significant story, is Bud Not Buddy. I need to find the Watsons Go to Birmingham and get that one. And I finally noticed Secret Garden. I see you, Secret Garden. Secret Garden is a beautiful story. It's like been adapted into television and movies and all the jazz. Now, what's interesting is Secret Garden does not actually have a definitive version, as I have learned from experience. Apparently, when it was released, not initially when it was released, but it's like when it was being distributed around the world, they came up with different versions. So it's like what happens in the writing in one is not quite the same as another, and the chapters are all over the place and stuff, but excuse me. The Secret Garden is really wonderful. It really is. And actually, that should be the next book I should read after I'm done with Nancy Drew finally. That's a great book. But I actually do want to go on to the fairy tales as well. I do have fairy tales. But when I do on fairy tales, and I will make sure to note it in, I will make sure to note in the videos, as well, is that these fairy tales are bloody. They are absolutely bloody. They're violent. Like, there's a lot of dismemberment. So that's like cutting off fingers, cutting off ears. That's the least things that are cut off. They're not necessarily gory, but they're pretty violent. So if anyone thought a fairy tale was tame, absolutely not. But these are stories that were taught to children beforehand, and I don't want children today not to be able to miss out on how awesome and scary these stories are. They're going to give you imagination, and they're also going to give you nightmares. It's the greatest thing. Yeah, so plans to finish up the Nancy Drew books. I do need to get back to 1 through 9 because I haven't finished that. You know, and like I said, adult books. I'm just gonna call it adult books. As well, and people should know all the differentiation of adult books: mystery, thriller, all that stuff. The reason why I'm being so talkative right now is because it's June, and I'm getting closer to my moving date, and it's like, okay. Yeah, okay. Once I move though, I probably will increase how much time I read, because 50 sessions, that's like 50 weeks. So if I can just like read 2 hours, that would actually that would finish up quite a bit of books quickly. I may actually have to even go as far as maybe just 1 hour for children and 1 hour for adults, but yeah, I actually might have to do it that way. But I can't do that right now. I'm just gonna stick with kid stuff, and then when I actually have the time, I will actually do both at the same time. But I also cannot wait to get onto Brian Jacques. It's beautiful. And of course you will see a different slideshow. I'm only showing the Nancy Drew slideshow, which are the games, by the way. These are not the books. In reference to the books that I'm reading. But when I finally do something like the Brian Jacques Redwall series, I would actually use a different slideshow for people to see. I think that's about it. And I hope you guys enjoy your summer. Truly. Because the flies are coming. In fact, I already have 3 flies inside my apartment. Yay! I'm gonna get out the rain. Okay, thank you guys for watching, and I will see, well, not see. Let's clarify this. I will not see you, but you will hear me. Close to Sunday? Oh, I'll probably release the next video on Monday or Tuesday. But anyway, see you wonderful people next time!